The stars above the colony of New Terra were unusually quiet that night. The usual shimmering glow of trade ships and distant communication satellites was missing. Commander Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiant, hands clasped behind his back, as he stared through the reinforced viewport. The hum of the ship's systems vibrated faintly beneath his boots. His dark eyes scanned the emptiness beyond the stars, searching for something. He didn't know what, but the silence in the void had weight, and it was heavy. "Commander," the calm voice of his AI companion, ECHO, filled the room. "Long-range sensors have detected an anomaly." Elias turned. "Define anomaly." ECHO's avatar materialized on the display, a simple blue holographic figure with faint, flickering outlines. Unidentified objects approaching at 0.8 light speed. Estimated time to contact, 8 minutes. Elias frowned. "Identify them." "Unable to," ECHO replied. "Their energy signatures don't match any known vessel." A cold feeling settled in Elias's chest. He tapped his wrist console. "Bridge, this is Commander Voss. Bring the fleet to high alert. All combat systems online." "Sir?" Lieutenant Carson's voice crackled through the comms. "We're not expecting any fleet movement today." "I'm not asking, Lieutenant. Do it now." The tension in the room thickened as the crew jumped into action. Red lights pulsed along the floor. Defensive shields powered up with a low-frequency hum. The ship's main cannons rotated into position along the hull. Elias's second-in-command, Captain Bonner, stepped onto the bridge, his helmet tucked under his arm. "What's going on?" Bonner asked. Elias gestured to the main display. "Unidentified ships. Not responding to hails." Bonner's jaw tightened. "How many?" ECHO answered. 238, all capital class." Bonner's expression darkened. "That's a war fleet." Elias's fists clenched at his sides. "Bring up the display." A shimmering projection of the enemy fleet appeared before them. Giant black shapes, unlike any known design, stretched across the void like predatory shadows. Their surfaces pulsed with a strange red glow, not mechanical, not organic, but something in between. "They're phasing," ECHO said, "shifting between real space and subspace." Bonner stepped closer. "How the hell is that possible?" "It's not," Elias muttered. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on the display. A transmission. The Galactic Council's crest flashed on the screen. High Chancellor Valera's face appeared, her smooth gray skin and elongated features twisted into a mask of cold disdain. "Commander Voss," Valera said, "you are ordered to stand down." Elias's brow furrowed. "Stand down. There's a hostile fleet approaching." "They are not hostile," Valera interrupted. "They are investigating." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Investigating what?" "That is not your concern." "Like hell it's not," Bonner growled. Valera's expression darkened. "The Council will handle this matter. Humanity is not authorized to engage." Elias stepped toward the display. "You expect us to sit here while they wipe us out?" Valera's gaze sharpened. "You are outmatched. Engaging would be suicide." Elias's jaw tightened. "If you won't protect us." "They are not your enemy," Valera repeated. "Stand down." The transmission cut out. Silence. Elias breathed heavily, his hands shaking. Bonner watched him carefully. "You're not going to listen to that, are you?" Bonner said. Elias's gaze returned to the dark shapes looming in the void. The cold feeling in his chest hardened into steel. Hell no. The enemy fleet surged forward. Red flares of energy erupted along their sides. The bridge alarms screamed to life. "Incoming fire," ECHO shouted. The first blast ripped through the outer defense line. 3 human ships disintegrated instantly, their hulls torn apart by dark energy lances. The shockwave slammed into the Defiant, rattling the bridge. Sparks erupted from a nearby console. "Shields down to 74%, ECHO reported. Elias's voice cut through the chaos. "Return fire." Bonner relayed the order. The human fleet opened fire, streaks of plasma and railgun rounds blazing toward the enemy ships. The enemy ships absorbed the hits like nothing. Then they fired back. The Defiant rocked violently as a pulse blast tore through its port side. A nearby console exploded, sending a crew member sprawling to the floor. Bonner pulled the injured soldier back as Elias gripped the control panel. "We can't win this fight," Bonner yelled. "We don't need to win," Elias replied. "We need to survive." Elias's eyes flicked toward ECHO. "Activate the cloaking system." ECHO hesitated. "Commander, the system is untested." "Do it." The ship's hull shimmered and warped as the cloaking field engaged. The Defiant flickered and disappeared from the enemy's targeting sensors. The enemy ships shifted course. Confused. "ECHO," Elias said, "take us into low orbit." The Defiant drifted beneath the battlefield, its engines running low and silent. Below them, New Terra's colony glowed faintly, millions of human lives unaware of the death looming above them. "Picking up a new energy surge," ECHO said, from the lid ship. On the display, the largest alien vessel's hull parted, revealing a core of shifting red light. "They're not targeting us," Bonner realized. "They're targeting the colony." A pulse of red energy charged within the core. Elias's breath caught in his chest. "No." The beam fired, a blinding red lance of energy lashing down toward the colony. The shield perimeter held for 2 seconds before collapsing. The beam struck the colony's central hub. The screen lit up with a silent flash. When the light faded, the colony was gone. A smoking crater where it once stood. The bridge was deathly silent. Elias's ears rang. His chest heaved. "Scanning for survivors," ECHO said quietly. After a moment, "Negative." Elias's hands curled into fists. His knuckles whitened. His eyes burned. He stepped away from the console, breathing heavily. Bonner's hand gripped his shoulder. "Commander." Elias shook him off. His face darkened. His jaw clenched. "They're going to pay for this." He turned toward the bridge crew, his voice cold as steel. "Ready the fleet." Bonner's brow furrowed. "The Council won't authorize it." Elias's eyes burned with quiet fury. "The Council isn't in command anymore." ECHO's holographic form flickered. "Commander, are you sure?" Elias's gaze sharpened. "Dan right, I'm sure." Outside the viewport, the alien fleet regrouped. Their red lights pulsed slowly like a predator's heartbeat. Elias's lips curled into a grim smile. "They wanted a fight," he whispered. "Let's give them one." The silence on the bridge of the Defiant was deafening. The burned-out remains of New Terra flickered on the screen, a dark cloud of debris and smoke drifting through the atmosphere. No one spoke. No one moved. Elias stood at the center of the room, his hands trembling at his sides. His chest heaved with each breath, but his face was hard as stone. Behind him, Bonner's hand hovered uncertainly over his shoulder, but Elias didn't acknowledge it. His gaze was locked on the lifeless remains of the colony below. ECHO's soft voice broke the silence. "Casualty estimate, 97% population loss. Scanning for life signs." Elias's jaw tightened. He already knew what ECHO would say next. "Negative." Bonner's hands curled into fists. His voice was thick with anger. "They wiped out an entire colony. Families. Children." His breath hitched, and the Council let it happen. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Not just the Council." Bonner turned toward him. "What are you saying?" Elias's fists clenched. They knew. The Council knew this was coming. That's why Valera told us to stand down. She knew what was going to happen. And she let it happen anyway. Bonner's eyes widened. Why would the Council allow this? Elias's gaze hardened. Because they aren't in control anymore. Suddenly, a proximity alarm blared through the bridge. The red glow of the enemy fleet sharpened as they began to advance again. The lead ship, larger than any vessel Elias had ever seen, pulsed with an eerie crimson light. Symbols, alien, ancient, glowed along its surface. The ship moved with precision, the kind of cold efficiency that sent a chill down Elias's spine. Isiko's voice sharpened. The enemy fleet is repositioning. They're moving into planetary orbit. They're not done, Bonner growled. They're going to finish the job. Elias's eyes flashed. Not if I stop them. Bonner's brow furrowed. Commander, we're outnumbered. Outgunned. That cloaking field won't hold if they start scanning for residual energy signatures. Elias turned toward the weapons officer. Prime the main guns. Bonner stepped in front of him. Elias. Not now, Bonner. I'm serious. Bonner's hand gripped Elias's arm. His eyes were sharp and desperate. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we charge into a fight we can't win. Elias's jaw flexed. He turned toward ECHO. Replay the attack. Slow it down. ECHO hesitated. Are you certain? Do it. The screen flickered. The colony's last moments replayed in slow motion. The red beam erupted from the lead ship, cutting through the colony's shields like paper. The energy pulse spread outward in a cascade of destruction, vaporizing entire city blocks in seconds. The devastation was absolute. Elias's eyes narrowed. Pause. The screen froze at the moment the beam struck. There, Elias said, pointing to the edge of the beam's point of origin. A faint shimmer surrounded the energy pulse, a secondary distortion, almost like cloaking field, Bonner muttered. Elias nodded. They're not just attacking with raw power, they're hiding something. ECHO magnified the image. The distortion became clearer, a ripple of energy beneath the beam itself. An encrypted signal. Decode it, Elias ordered. ECHO's form flickered. Processing. After a few seconds, the distortion stabilized. A string of alien symbols appeared on the screen, followed by a single line of translated text. Accept subjugation, or face extinction. Bonner's breath hissed between his teeth. It's a message. Elias's eyes darkened. A warning. Suddenly, ECHO's form flickered erratically. Unidentified data packet detected. From where? Elias demanded. The enemy fleet, ECHO replied. There, transmitting directly into our systems. The bridge lights dimmed. Elias's console flickered. Then the main screen flashed with a dark red glow. A figure appeared, tall and thin, draped in black metallic armor. Its face was hidden beneath a jagged helmet, only the faint glow of red eyes visible beneath the visor. Its voice was sharp and cold, echoing through the bridge like a blade scraping against glass. Humanity, the figure said. You were given a choice. Elias's face darkened. Who are you? We are the architects, the figure replied. We are the inevitable force that will shape this galaxy. Your resistance is insignificant. Bonner's hands curled into fists. You murdered billions of innocent people. Innocence. The figure's voice sharpened. There is no innocence in weakness. Strength determines survival. Elias's eyes narrowed. If strength determines survival, why are you hiding behind the council? The figure's helmeted face tilted slightly. Because they understood the truth. What truth? Elias demanded. The figure's red eyes pulsed. Humanity was a mistake, a deviation. Your species' unpredictable nature makes you dangerous. You will either serve or be eradicated. Elias stepped forward, his eyes burning with quiet fury. We're not going to serve you. The figure's red eyes brightened. Then you will die. The transmission cut out. The bridge lights returned to normal. ECHO's form stabilized. They're preparing to fire, ECHO said. Elias turned toward Bonner. You said we need to understand what we're dealing with. Well, now we know. Bonner's face was tense. And Elias's voice was steel. "We're going to make them regret it." "Commander." EKO's tone sharpened. Incoming transmission from the Council. Valera's face appeared on the screen. Her expression was grim. "Commander Voss, what have you done?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "What I had to." Valera's expression darkened. "You have provoked them. The Council cannot protect you." "I'm not asking for protection," Elias said coldly. Valera's gaze sharpened. "Then what are you asking for?" Elias's eyes gleamed. "Authorization to launch a full-scale counteroffensive." Valera's face twisted with anger. "Absolutely not. Humanity is outnumbered." "Authorization isn't a request," Elias interrupted. "It's a courtesy." "You'll be court-martialed for this," Valera said. Elias's lips curled into a cold smile. "If I survive." The transmission cut out. Bonner stepped toward him. "You're sure about this?" Elias's eyes gleamed with quiet fury. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The bridge shuddered as the alien fleet adjusted its formation. The lead ship's core pulsed again, gathering energy for another strike. Elias turned toward ECHO. "Prepare the fleet." ECHO's form flickered. "Confirmed." Bonner's eyes flashed with quiet determination. Time to remind them why humanity isn't so easy to kill. Elias stepped toward the viewport, his gaze burning into the void beyond. "They wanted a war," he whispered. "Let's give them one." The silence in the command deck was broken only by the low hum of the ship's engines. Elias stood at the center, his hands resting on the cold metal of the tactical console. His face was set, hard and focused. Around him, the crew moved with quiet urgency, checking systems, recalibrating weapons, and preparing for the inevitable fight. The alien fleet had stopped advancing, but Elias knew it was just a matter of time. They were waiting, watching, calculating. Bonner stood beside Elias, his hands resting on his belt. His expression was grim. "They're playing with us," he said quietly. "They could finish us any time they want." "They're trying to figure us out," Elias replied. His eyes darkened. "They think we're weak." Bonner's mouth tightened. "Maybe they're right." Elias's gaze sharpened. "Are you ready to let them be right?" Bonner's jaw flexed. "Hell no." "Then let's prove them wrong." A sharp chime echoed through the deck. Ichiko's form flickered into view, the soft glow of her blue figure casting faint shadows across the room. "Enemy fleet is repositioning," she said. "They've opened an encrypted channel. They want to speak with you." Bonner's face twisted with disgust. "After what they did." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The screen on the far wall blinked to life. The same figure appeared, tall, armored, with those cold red eyes burning beneath the jagged helmet. The architect's voice was sharp and calm. "You are wasting time, Commander Voss. Surrender now, and your species will be preserved." Elias's eyes narrowed. "You call wiping out a colony preservation." The architect's head tilted slightly. "The weak must be culled to strengthen the whole. You cling to outdated concepts of morality and compassion. Such weakness will lead to your extinction." Bonner took a sharp step forward. "You murdered civilians. Children." The architect's voice didn't change. "Collateral damage." Elias's chest tightened, his gaze darkened. "We're not going to surrender." The architect's eyes pulsed red. "Then you have chosen extinction." The transmission cut off abruptly. The bridge lights returned to normal, but the coldness left behind seemed to linger. ECO's form flickered. "Commander, they've activated weapons. They're targeting our fleet." Elias straightened, his hands curled into fists. "How long until they fire?" 30 seconds. Elias turned toward the weapons officer. "Prepare countermeasures." Bonner stepped closer. His voice was low. "We're outnumbered 5-1. Elias's lips curled into a cold smile. "Then we'll have to get creative." The ship shuddered beneath them. A pulse of red light erupted from the lead enemy ship, cutting through the darkness of space like a blade. The energy beam struck the shields of the nearest human frigate. The ship's hull screamed under the pressure before the shield collapsed. The frigate erupted into a cloud of debris and fire. Bonner's face twisted with anger. We can't win a head-on fight. We're not going to fight them head-on. Elias's eyes sharpened. We're going to make them chase us. ECHO's voice sharpened. Incoming fighters. 25 units closing in fast. Deploy interceptors, Elias ordered. The ship's hangar doors opened. Small, fast human fighters launched into the dark, their engines glowing bright blue as they shot toward the enemy formation. The alien fighters closed the distance almost immediately. Bright bursts of plasma erupted in the darkness as the two sides clashed. We're losing fighters, Bonner shouted. Elias's gaze remained cold and steady. Hold position. Elias, hold. Suddenly, the alien fighters' formation faltered. A single human fighter spiraled through their ranks, weaving between enemy fire before releasing a burst of high-yield missiles. The alien ships erupted in a cascade of fire and debris. Bonner's eyes widened. That was. Elias's gaze flicked toward the display. Cortez. The comm line buzzed to life. Commander, that's one for the record books. Cortez's voice crackled. Still got about 20 of them left, though. Keep them busy, Elias replied. We're not done yet. ECHO's form flickered. Commander, the lead enemy ship is powering its main cannon. Bonner's eyes flashed with fear. That thing could level half the fleet. Elias's gaze darkened. Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't get the chance. Commander. ECHO's voice sharpened. New energy signatures. Multiple ships entering the system. Elias's head whipped toward the display. A cluster of human ships emerged from the darkness. The flagship's markings were clear. It's the 7th Fleet, Bonner breathed. Elias's jaw tightened. About damn time. Admiral Hayes's face appeared on the screen. Her sharp gaze locked onto Elias. Commander Voss, I hope you weren't planning on starting the party without us. Elias's lips curled into a cold smile. Wouldn't dream of it. Hayes's gaze sharpened. You have a plan. Elias's eyes narrowed. We draw them in, break their line, then hit them where it hurts. Understood. We'll cover your flank. The screen blinked out. Elias turned toward Bonner. Prepare the boarding teams. Bonner's eyes widened. Boarding teams. Elias's gaze was hard. We're not just going to destroy that ship. We're going to take it. Bonner's face paled. You're serious. Deadly. The ship shuddered violently. Another beam struck the Defiance shields. ECHO's form flickered. Shields at 46% integrity. Elias's gaze sharpened. Engage the cloaking field. The ship's exterior shimmered as the cloaking field activated. The enemy ships fired wildly into the dark, but the Defiant was already gone. Commander, ECHO said, we can approach the enemy flagship under cover of the cloak. Bring us in close, Elias ordered. The ship moved silently through the darkness. The massive enemy flagship loomed ahead, its surface pulsing with dark red energy. Bonner's voice was low. If this doesn't work. It'll work, Elias said. The ship approached the enemy hull. The docking clamps engaged with a soft hiss. The boarding lights turned green. Elias stood at the airlock, his helmet in his hand. He turned toward Bonner. You ready for this? Bonner's eyes were sharp. Born ready. Elias slipped the helmet over his head. Let's show them what humanity can do. The airlock hissed open. Elias and Bonner stepped into the dark interior of the enemy ship. The red glow of the walls seemed to pulse with dark energy. Ahead of them, a dozen alien figures emerged from the shadows. Tall, armored, with glowing red eyes beneath their helmets. Elias's grip tightened on his weapon. His voice was cold and steady. For the fallen. Bonner's eyes flashed with quiet fury. For the fallen. The aliens raised their weapons. Elias and Bonner charged. The corridor erupted into chaos. Plasma fire streaked through the darkness as the two sides clashed. Elias's rifle burned in his hands as he cut down one enemy after another. Bonner's voice was sharp over the comm. On your left. Elias spun, driving his elbow into the nearest alien's helmet before firing a burst into its chest. The alien fell, its body smoking. Behind him, Bonner was a whirlwind of destruction, his heavy rifle cutting through the enemy ranks. Elias's eyes sharpened. Push forward. They moved deeper into the ship, the dark red glow of the enemy core pulsing ahead. Elias's gaze darkened. We end this. Now. The darkness inside the enemy ship pressed down like a heavy weight. Elias's breath echoed inside his helmet as he moved down the narrow corridor, his rifle raised and ready. Bonner was right behind him, his heavy boots clanking softly against the metallic floor. The red glow from the ship's core pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat, casting long shadows that danced with each step they took. We're getting close, Bonner whispered over the comm. Elias's gaze narrowed as the hallway opened into a vast chamber. Towering columns of dark metal lined the walls, stretching toward a high ceiling covered in pulsating veins of red light. At the center of the room stood the core, a massive sphere of dark energy, swirling with streaks of crimson and violet lightning. A platform extended toward it, and standing at the edge of that platform was the architect. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. There he is. Bonner's eyes darkened. And he's waiting for us. The architect's glowing red eyes lifted toward them. His metallic voice echoed through the chamber. Fools. Without warning, the floor beneath them pulsed with energy. Elias's helmet display flashed red as the gravity in the room shifted violently. He stumbled, barely managing to stay upright, as Bonner crashed to the ground beside him. Magnetic field, Bonner growled. Elias's boots adjusted, stabilizing against the field. He lifted his rifle. The architect raised one armored hand. A pulse of red energy erupted from his palm. Elias barely had time to throw himself aside as the blast tore through the air, striking the wall behind him in an explosion of fire and debris. Bonner rolled to his feet, firing a burst of plasma rounds toward the architect. The shot stopped in midair, caught in a swirling field of dark energy. The architect's gaze pulsed red. With a flick of his hand, the plasma rounds reversed direction, flying back toward Bonner. He barely ducked in time as the shots exploded behind him. Damn it, Bonner cursed. Elias pushed himself to his feet. His breath was sharp. His gaze locked onto the swirling core behind the architect. We need to take out the core. Bonner's eyes flashed. We can't get close to it with him standing there. Elias's jaw tightened. Then we'll have to make an opening. ECHO's voice crackled through the comm. Commander, you need to hurry. Enemy reinforcements are inbound. How long? Less than 3 minutes. Bonner's eyes widened. We're out of time. Elias's gaze darkened. Then we finish this now. He charged forward. The architect's eyes glowed brighter. A pulse of energy erupted from his chest, but Elias was already moving. He slid beneath the blast, coming up to one knee and firing a burst from his rifle. The architect's shield absorbed the shots effortlessly. The architect raised one hand. Elias's body locked in place, caught in a telekinetic grip. His muscles strained as the architect lifted him into the air. You are a flawed species, the architect's voice echoed. Your reliance on emotion weakens you. Elias's breath caught as the invisible force tightened around his chest. His vision darkened. Bonner's voice cut through the haze. Get your hands off him. Bonner launched himself at the architect. His shoulder smashed into the alien's side, knocking him back. The telekinetic grip on Elias broke, and he dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. Bonner fired point-blank into the architect's chest. The shots exploded in a burst of energy, driving the architect backward. Now, Bonner shouted. Elias pushed to his feet. He reached for his sidearm, pulling out a small cylindrical device. He activated it, and the tip began to hum with violet energy. The architect's gaze locked onto it. A human weapon. Elias's gaze darkened. No. He threw the device toward the core. The architect's gaze flashed as he reached out telekinetically. But it was already too late. The device embedded itself into the core's surface. A surge of violet energy erupted through the dark sphere. The core's glow began to distort, flashing violently. The architect's voice sharpened. "What have you done?" Elias lifted his rifle, leveling the playing field. The core erupted in a violent pulse of energy. The architect's shield flickered. Elias and Bonner braced as the shockwave tore through the chamber. The architect's shield collapsed. His eyes narrowed. "You've made a mistake." He charged toward Elias, faster than any human should be able to move. Elias barely got his weapon up in time. The architect's fist struck the rifle, shattering it. Bonner tackled the architect from the side, driving him into the ground. The architect twisted, his metallic hand closing around Bonner's throat. "Bonner!" Elias shouted. Bonner gasped as the architect's grip tightened. His feet kicked helplessly as the alien lifted him into the air. Elias's gaze sharpened. He reached for his sidearm and fired a burst into the architect's side. The shot struck deep, dark ichor spilling from the wounds. The architect's gaze flashed toward Elias. He threw Bonner aside. Bonner hit the floor hard, gasping. The architect advanced toward Elias. "Your resistance is meaningless." Elias's jaw tightened. "Maybe. But you still bleed." He lunged forward. The architect's hand shot out, but Elias twisted at the last second, driving his fist into the open wound in the architect's side. The alien stumbled. Elias followed with a sharp blow to the head. The architect's helmet cracked. Behind them, the core pulsed dangerously. Sparks of violet and red energy spiraled across its surface. Bonner pushed himself to his knees, blood on his lip. His voice was sharp. "Elias, it's gonna blow." Elias's breath was sharp. He grabbed Bonner's arm and pulled him to his feet. "We need to go." The architect's hand shot out, grabbing Elias's wrist. His eyes burned bright red. "You will die here with me." Elias's gaze sharpened. "No." He twisted, pulling the architect toward him, and then driving his elbow into the alien's already cracked helmet. The architect stumbled. Bonner's rifle lifted. "Duck." Elias dropped to the floor. Bonner fired. The shot struck the architect's exposed face. The alien's body spasmed before collapsing to the ground. Elias pulled himself to his feet, breathing hard. "Nice shot." Bonner grinned despite the blood on his teeth. "You're welcome." Behind them, the core pulsed violently. The energy field began to collapse. CAO's voice sharpened. "Commander, you need to evacuate immediately." Elias and Bonner sprinted toward the exit. The corridor behind them erupted in a cascade of explosions as the core destabilized. Metal screamed as the ship's structure began to collapse. They reached the docking clamps. Elias slammed his hand against the control panel. The airlock doors hissed open. They stumbled inside as the clamps disengaged. The ship pulled away from the enemy vessel as the entire structure began to implode. From the bridge of the Defiant, Elias watched as the enemy flagship folded inward. A final burst of red and violet light erupted into the darkness before the ship disappeared completely. Bonner sat beside him, breathing hard. "Did we get him?" Elias's gaze darkened. "We'll see." Outside, the remaining alien ships began to retreat. The human fleet pushed forward, their engines burning bright against the backdrop of deep space. Elias's voice was quiet. "For the fallen." Bonner's gaze sharpened. "For the fallen." The aftermath of the battle left a hollow silence across the human fleet. Elias stood on the observation deck of the Defiant, his hands resting on the cool glass of the viewport. Beyond the reinforced glass, the wreckage of the architect's flagship floated like twisted metal corpses against the void of space. Pieces of dark alien hull spun weightlessly, glowing faintly with residual energy from the core's violent collapse. Despite the victory, Elias's chest felt heavy. Bonner stood beside him, arms crossed over his chest. His face was lined with exhaustion, dark bruises forming along his jaw and neck from the architect's brutal grip. But his eyes were sharp, scanning the field of debris beyond the glass. "We did it," Bonner said, his voice rough. Elias's gaze remained fixed on the broken remains of the enemy fleet. "Barely. Barely is enough," Bonner replied. "We're still standing." Elias's jaw tightened. "Not all of us." Bonner's expression darkened. They had lost too many. Good soldiers. Good friends. Faces that wouldn't be waiting for them when they returned home. A soft chime sounded from the command console. EKO's voice filtered through the speakers. "Commander Elias, Admiral Hayes is requesting your presence in the war room." Elias sighed. "Acknowledge." Bonner pushed away from the glass. "Guess we'd better see what the brass wants." They made their way through the ship's dim corridors, the faint hum of the engines vibrating through the floor beneath their boots. Crew members stood at attention as they passed, their eyes filled with quiet respect and relief. They had won. Against impossible odds, they had survived. The war room was dimly lit, a circular space dominated by a holographic display of the star map. Admiral Hayes stood at the head of the room, his silver hair cropped close to his head. His gaze was sharp, his mouth set in a grim line. Around him, senior officers and strategists watched as the remnants of the enemy fleet were tracked on the hologram. Elias and Bonner stepped inside. Hayes's gaze lifted toward them. "Commander," the Admiral said. His tone was hard to read. Not exactly congratulatory, but not displeased either. "Sir," Elias said, standing at attention. Hayes's gaze sharpened. "You succeeded in destroying the Architect's core." "Yes, sir," Elias said. "The damage was substantial," Hayes continued. "Without their core, the enemy fleet's tactical cohesion has collapsed. Their remaining ships have fallen back beyond the outer rim." Elias's jaw tightened. "That's good." "It's better than good," Hayes said. "It's an opportunity." Elias's gaze narrowed. "Sir," Hayes's eyes flashed. "The enemy is vulnerable. For the first time in this war, they've lost the advantage. We can strike back." Bonner's expression darkened. "They still have the numbers. Their technology is still more advanced than ours." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "Numbers don't matter if they can't organize fast enough to respond." Elias's chest tightened. "And you want us to lead the attack?" "You're the only ones who fought the Architect directly and lived," Hayes said. "Your team knows their tactics better than anyone. We can't let them recover." Elias's mind raced. The enemy had been weakened, but they weren't broken. And even without the Architect, they were still dangerous, still ruthless. "Sir," Elias said carefully, "if we're going to push forward, we need more support. Reinforcements. Supplies." "You'll have them," Hayes said. Elias hesitated. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." Elias's gaze hardened. "We can't win this war by ourselves. Destroying the core was a lucky strike. But next time, they'll adapt. They always do." Hayes's expression didn't change. "Then we'll adapt faster." Bonner's gaze sharpened. "That's a lot of faith to put on one strike team." Hayes's gaze lifted toward them. "Humanity has always been underestimated. The Architect thought you were nothing more than a primitive species. He was wrong." Bonner's jaw tightened. "So, what now?" Hayes's gaze darkened. "Now we show them what humanity is capable of." Elias's chest tightened. He exchanged a glance with Bonner. The weight of what they had accomplished and what lay ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. Isito's voice interrupted the tense silence. "Commander, incoming transmission from the outer perimeter. It's the Salvarian envoy." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Put them through." The room's central hologram shifted. The image of a tall, slender alien with gleaming silver skin and pale violet eyes appeared. His expression was calm, but his gaze held a flicker of something deeper. "Commander Elias," the envoy said, On behalf of the Solvarian High Council, I extend our gratitude. Elias's gaze darkened. Gratitude. You destroy the architect, the envoy said. You've succeeded where countless other species have failed. Bonner's gaze sharpened, and now you're ready to join the fight. The envoy's gaze hardened. Perhaps. Hayes's expression remained cold. What's stopping you? The envoy's gaze sharpened. Fear. Elias's eyes narrowed. The architect was only one piece of the threat. The envoy said, there are others. Stronger. More dangerous. Elias's breath tightened. Then we need to unite. The envoy's gaze softened. Perhaps you are right. Humanity has shown strength where others have faltered. Bonner's voice was sharp. We don't need your approval. The envoy's gaze darkened. No, but you may need our help. Elias's chest tightened. We're not asking for help. The envoy's expression was unreadable. Even the strongest must lean on others. Hayes's gaze sharpened. And are you willing to lean on us? The envoy hesitated. Then he inclined his head slightly. Perhaps. The transmission ended, leaving a cold silence in its wake. Bonner's expression hardened. You think they'll actually help? Elias's gaze darkened. We'll see. Hayes's gaze sharpened. Get some rest. Commander, you'll need it. Elias nodded. He turned, walking toward the exit with Bonner beside him. Bonner's voice was low. So what's the plan? Elias's gaze narrowed. We push forward. Bonner's lips curled into the cold blackness of space, stretched endlessly before them. Elias stood on the bridge of the Defiant, his eyes fixed on the view beyond the reinforced glass. Stars blinked faintly in the distance, small pinpricks of light in the eternal darkness. The wreckage of the architect's fleet had drifted far, becoming little more than shadows against the void. The quiet hum of the ship's systems filled the air, a soft reminder that they were still alive, still breathing, still standing. Elias's hands were clasped behind his back. His uniform was still stained with soot and dried blood, a silent testament to the battle they had survived. His reflection in the glass looked hollow, eyes dark and sunken. Sleep had been a luxury he couldn't afford. The weight of what lay ahead sat heavily on his shoulders. A soft chime sounded. Ichiho's voice filtered through the speakers. Commander Elias, you have a priority transmission from Admiral Hayes. Elias exhaled slowly. Patch it through. The holographic display flickered to life. Admiral Hayes's sharp face appeared, his silver hair neatly combed back despite the fatigue that shadowed his eyes. Behind him, the war room's tactical display showed the movement of enemy fleets, glowing red markers sweeping across the star map like bleeding wounds. Commander, Hayes said, we've received confirmation from the outer colonies. The enemy forces are retreating. The loss of the Architect's Corps has destabilized their chain of command. Elias's jaw tightened. How long until they reorganize? Hayes's gaze hardened. We don't know, but it's only a matter of time. Elias's chest tightened. We'll be ready. Hayes's expression sharpened. We're not done, Commander. The war isn't over. It never is, Elias said quietly. Hayes's gaze darkened. We have an opportunity to strike back, but the Council won't authorize a full offensive unless we secure support from the Solvarians. Elias's brow furrowed. And what's their price? The usual, Hayes said. Blood and loyalty. Elias's gaze darkened. The Solvarians had watched humanity suffer for decades without lifting a finger. Now, after humanity had weakened the enemy, they wanted to negotiate from a position of strength. I want you to lead the diplomatic mission, Hayes said. Elias's jaw tightened. I'm not a diplomat. You are now, Hayes said coldly. They trust you. You fought where they wouldn't. Elias's gaze narrowed. And if they refuse? Hayes's eyes darkened. Then we remind them why they feared us in the first place. The transmission ended with a cold crackle of static. Elias stood silently for a moment, the weight of the order settling in his chest like cold iron. He knew what Hayes meant. Humanity had proven its strength on the battlefield, and now the galaxy would have to decide whether to stand with them or against them. Behind him, Bonner's voice cut through the tension. So, first we saved the galaxy, and now we have to convince it. Elias's lips curled into a faint smile. Seems that way. Bonner's boots echoed against the metal floor as he approached. His face was still bruised, but his eyes were bright with quiet determination. You think they'll listen? Elias's gaze hardened. They don't have a choice. Bonner's grin widened. Good. The soft hum of the ship's engine shifted. Ikiko's voice filtered through the air again. Commander, incoming transmission from the Zolvarian High Council. Shall I patch it through? Elias exhaled slowly. Do it. The holographic display flickered. The Zolvarian envoy appeared, his silver skin gleaming beneath the soft light. His pale violet eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Elias. Commander Elias, the envoy said smoothly, I trust you have recovered from your ordeal. Elias's gaze sharpened. We're still here. The envoy's expression remained unreadable. Indeed, your success against the architect has not gone unnoticed. You're welcome, Bonner said dryly. The envoy's gaze shifted toward him, then back to Elias. The High Council has convened. They are prepared to discuss terms. Elias's gaze darkened. We don't have terms. We have conditions. The envoy's expression tightened. You presume to dictate to the council. Elias's gaze sharpened. We bled for this war. We lost ships. We lost people. While your council sat back and waited for the outcome. If you want to stand with us, if you want humanity's strength at your back, then you'll meet us as equals. A long silence followed. The envoy's pale eyes narrowed slightly. Then he inclined his head. Perhaps you are not as primitive as we believed. Elias's jaw tightened. Perhaps you're not as wise as you believed. The envoy's gaze sharpened. Very well. The council will convene. We will discuss an alliance. Elias's gaze hardened. Do more than discuss. The transmission ended with a flicker of light. Bonner let out a low whistle. Diplomacy, huh? He said. Not bad. Elias's gaze remained cold. It's not over yet. Bonner's grin widened. Good. A soft chime echoed through the bridge. Ikiko's voice filtered through the speakers. Commander, the fleet is ready. Orders. Elias's chest tightened. His gaze swept over the viewport. Beyond the glass, humanity's fleet floated in formation, a wall of steel and firepower against the endless dark. The scars of the battle were still fresh, but the crews stood ready, waiting. Elias's jaw tightened, set a course for the outer rim. Coordinates? Ikiko asked. Elias's gaze narrowed, straight through enemy territory. ECHO's response was calm. Understood. Bonner's expression darkened. So, what's the plan? Elias's eyes gleamed with quiet fire. We survived their worst. Now we show them humanity's best. The engines rumbled as the ship powered up. Beyond the glass, the fleet began to move, sweeping through the blackness of space toward the unknown. Humanity had bled for this moment. They had suffered. They had endured. And now, they would rise. Elias's hand tightened around the console. His gaze was steady. The future stretched out before them, dark and uncertain. But humanity had faced the dark before. They had survived. And now, for the first time in the long, bloody history of this war, they were no longer running. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing bright against the cold dark. Humanity was done waiting. It was time to take the fight to the enemy.